Hi, it's Dr. Don Stinson. I wanted to check in and talk to you about a few of the things that you've been reading and watching during this unit, and kind of try to articulate a little bit about why I assign those things and what I think that we should get from them. The two essays that I assigned, one Sherman Alexie's The Joy of Reading and Writing, Superman and Me, and Malcolm X's Learning to Read, are both what we call literacy narratives. A literacy narrative is just a story basically about someone's discovery of literacy, of reading and writing, and of the difference that it has made in their lives. I think it's interesting those two pieces both come from members of marginalized groups. In the case of Alexie, a poor Native American kid on a reservation with family dysfunction. His father's an alcoholic. Both his father and mother struggle to find jobs and to make ends meet. So that, makes the young Alexie obviously a member of a disadvantaged group. And then Malcolm X grows up on the mean streets of the East Coast city. He runs with African American street gangs. He becomes a pimp, a drug dealer, a thief, and ends up in prison. So both of these writers, come from tough backgrounds, as some of you may have. For both of them, and Alexie puts this in very clear terms, they're saved by literacy, by learning to read, learning to write, and then being able to use that literacy in ways to help not only themselves but to help others. Of course, Malcolm X becomes a great civil rights leader. Controversial, yes, and ultimately assassinated after renouncing some of his earlier, more violent beliefs, but influential, definitely. And Sherman Alexie, of course, becomes a best-selling author, champion poet, a filmmaker, and someone that goes back to the reservation to try to reach other Indian kids, as he calls them, that haven't gotten turned on to books and to the possibilities of reading and writing. So both of them, I think there's a lot in common in those two essays. And thankfully, Sherman Alexie is still with us. He's one of the most prominent Native American writers in the U.S. today, and we can expect and hope to hear a lot more from him in years to come. Annie Dillard's Hand in My Own Life is always an interesting one to work on with students. When I teach Comp 1 and I have students write descriptive essays, they often write essays about parents or step-parents. And they often focus on how much the parents were there for them, that they were at every football game they played, they were at every concert they did. And in the case of Dillard, she describes a very different set of parents. Parents that are supportive, yes, financially. They'll look at her drawings. They'll, talk to her about her problems. They discipline her and supervise her. So they do function as parents, but they make it clearer to her that they're not going to come to her games. They're not going to come to her piano recitals. They're not going to listen to her talk for hours about her latest enthusiasms. And rather than being resentful of that and feeling like, oh, they were never there for me, she actually sees it now as an adult looking back that they handed her a great gift. And that was the realization that the things in life that are really worth doing are the things that we do for ourselves, right? And I love that essay. My parents really they weren't readers. They had no interest in literature. They had no interest in writing. They didn't like my music. That's true of a lot of parents, right? So I kind of learned to do things my way for me. And I'm not a successful person, at least in the eyes of the world, in terms of money or fame or anything like that. But I think my life has turned out pretty blessed, right? And learning to follow my own instincts has been important with that. Malcolm Gladwell's essay, The Art of Failure, reminds us that every success is built on a string of failures. It also reminds us, though, that there are two ways in which we can fail. We can fail because we panic, or we can fail because we choke. And I think particularly when you look at what the essay has to say about test taking, right? And how we can set ourselves up for failure through our mindset, right? Like, I think it's fascinating that you can do something as simple as ask girls and boys to record their gender, check off a box, male or female, before they take a math test. And then if you do that, the boys do just as well, but the girls do a lot worse, right? It's as if they're reminding themselves of that stereotype, oh, girls aren't good at math, right? And of course it sets them up, right? Same thing with the African American students that are told this is an IQ test, right? Well, they somehow have internalized society's message, that the stereotype that blacks aren't as intelligent as whites somehow. And that paralyzes them because they know they're smart, but now they're being asked to sort of prove it, right? Prove that their race is as smart, and they don't do as well on the test. Right? Whereas the white students, you don't see as much of a change. Those are interesting results in and of themselves, but the thing that really interests me is what they have to say about mindset and how important it is and how well we perform tasks and how well we do. Sir Ken Robinson's essay on creative schools, and I would also encourage you, by the way, to watch the web link to his TED Talk on creativity, which is really funny. The guy's a great writer on education, but he's also kind of a stand-up comic too. He gets at what I think is a fundamental problem with American education today, that we've gone too far in the direction of standardized tests and regimentation and uniformity and trying to make everybody the same and everything the same. And what we've sometimes stamped out is creativity. And that means both creativity in teachers, and I can tell you that teachers increasingly are facing pressure to do everything the same way, right? So there has been for some time a movement in K through 12 education to kind of create cookie cutter teachers, and we're seeing the same thing in higher ed now. I think that's a grave mistake. But also we want creativity in our students, right? So I think Sir Ken Robinson reminds us that there's a role for creativity, and when we're talking about creativity, we're not just talking about the arts. We're talking about creativity in science. We're talking about creativity in how to solve math problems, in engineering, in a wide range of activities. Right? Finally, you read Alfie Kohn's From Degrading to Degrading, where he makes the radical proposal that the best thing we could do to help our nation's education system is to get rid of grading. I'm cynical about that ever happening, but I have to say he's pretty convincing. I think there is a difference in people being turned on to learning and people being turned on to making good grades, right? I have students that are members of the President's Leadership Council sometimes, and some of them are genuinely bright, self-motivated, interesting people. Some of them are what I call grade grubbers, though. And the grade grubbers really aren't as interested in learning as they are in being number one and having a 4.0 average so they can get into X college and get X degree and make a lot of money and yada yada. I compare those students to like those lab rats in scientific studies that learn to push a button to get a jolt of cocaine, right? Hit the button, get a shot of Coke. Hit the button, get a shot of Coke, right? They're addicted to the Coke, and so it's like, give me another hit, give me another hit, give me another A, give me another A, you know? And I think that's very different than someone who's truly interested in and loves learning. Right? So there's a lot in those essays, and I hope you'll reflect on those and think about them, and feel free to use any of those in your paper, right, as you're thinking about what you want to write about. As far as the PowerPoints, they're all about rhetoric, and rhetoric is the art of persuasion. Aristotle established the basic blueprint over 2,500 years ago, 2,400 years ago in the rhetoric. It's a combination of ethos, that is personal credibility and authority, logos, logic, facts, evidence, and pathos, learning how to use legitimate emotional appeals to get across to readers or listeners or people watching your TV show, whatever it might be, visiting your website. That's still just as true today. Of those three, I think ethos is the most important. If people don't trust you, if people don't like you, if people think you don't know what you're talking about, they're going to tune you out. Right? So you first have to establish that you're worth listening to, that you have something to say that's worth people hearing, right? That you have something to write that's worth people reading. And that's where a lot of things come in. The way you present your ideas in a paper. If I'm reading your paper and I'm so distracted by constant grammatical mistakes or punctuation errors or sentence structure errors or spelling errors, I begin to doubt your credibility. Is that fair? Maybe not, but it's what most people do. They judge you based on how you present your ideas as much as by the ideas themselves, right? So ethos is established partly by following the rules and learning how to write standard English, right? So Aristotle gives us that basic approach to argumentation. The three other rhetorical theories that you've looked at refine it in different ways, take it in different directions. Of the three, I would put in a pitch for Rogerian rhetoric. We live in a world today where we've got a lot of polarization. We've got, our country is divided in a way that I haven't seen it divided since probably the 1960s and early 1970s. We've got a lot of us versus them. People that voted for Hillary Clinton can't understand why people would have voted for Donald Trump. And people that voted for Donald Trump can't understand how anyone could have voted for, quote, crooked Hillary. You've got a lot of name calling. You've got a lot of paranoia. You've got a lot of people that aren't using their heads so much as they're using their hearts, which can sometimes be good, but more often can lead us into some dark corners, right? So Rogerian rhetoric is a way of trying to find some kind of common ground. We know we disagree about who should be president. We know we disagree about abortion or gun control, or we disagree about this or that, right? The football players, whether they should be made to stand for the national anthem or whether it's a righteous thing that they're protesting by taking a kneel. We can disagree about all of that. Can we, though, disagree civilly? And can we learn to understand where each other is coming from? In other words, I may disagree with you, but I think you're a decent person and I understand the points that you're making, right? Can you understand the points I'm making? Do you think I'm a decent person? That's where Rogerian rhetoric is trying to get us to. And if we could get to that point as a country, in the United States Congress, within the factions of our political parties, we could perhaps do some great things in this country, right? So I think Rogerian rhetoric is a tool of just trying to reach out, build those bridges, find that common ground, and bring us together, right? Toulmin's method, I've never been particularly interested in. It gives us a useful vocabulary. People make claims on issues based on warrants or assumptions that they have, right? So if we assume certain things, we act on those in different ways, right? And there are examples that I sometimes use on the gun control debate. One thing that comes up are people's perceptions of their own safety, right? Do you need a gun to defend yourself and your house and your property and your family? Well, it may be if you live in certain places, yes, you do, and that would be a wonderful thing. In other cases, you may be greatly overstating the insecurity of where you live, right? How likely is it that someone's going to kick in your door, right, and try to rape your daughter or murder a member of your family or take your stuff? And of course, the more insecure people feel, the more they feel like, oh, I need to have a gun to protect myself. So they're making a warrant, as Toulmin calls it, or an assumption that they live in a very safe area or that something horrible could happen in any minute. But is it actually true, right? And by the way, I'm not opposing gun ownership. I'm not a radical of any kind. I'm a militant moderate when it comes to most social issues and political issues. I'm just using that as an example of the assumptions that people make that lead them to take specific positions, right? The final one, social judgment theory, basically reminds us that when presented with some kind of change or policy or rule or proposal or new law, the first sort of default reaction most of us have is, wow, how's this going to affect me, right? And that's called ego involvement. I think that's a fundamental truth. I think most people react that way. President Trump has proposed his tax plan, what he'd like to see Congress, approve. I'm pretty sure most people, if they look into that, the first thing they're going to look at is this going to lower my taxes or is this going to raise my taxes? We all like lower taxes. So our ego involvement is probably going to make us curious to see where we can. Are we going to be a winner or a loser in this proposal, right? And our decision whether to support that is probably going to depend on that a lot more than it does on other factors. We're greedy and self-interested as people. Not all of us, but most of us. It's kind of our default in some cases. Right? So ego involvement means that if you want to persuade someone of your point of view, you have to convince them there's something in it for them, right? You have to think, how do I tailor this to make this person see this as something that's going to benefit her or him? And that's the trick, right? The other aspect of social judgment theory that I think is interesting is the boomerang effect. The boomerang effect is part of that latitude of rejection, where the things about an issue that people just reject, right? If you try too hard to convince someone of something, you sometimes end up pushing them further away. That's the boomerang effect. My kids used to complain about certain students at the high school that were very zealous evangelical Christians, and they would, try to push Jesus on the other kids, but they did so in such a kind of pushy and what was sometimes perceived as judgmental way that it ended up turning a lot of the kids off on what they were selling, if you will, their version of Christianity. We have to guard against that, and we have to be careful about that. How do we come off to other people? Do we turn them off needlessly with the way we come on, the how harshly we approach the issue, right? So I hope as you've gone through this unit and you've looked at all of these things, it's kind of starting to make connections. I'm asking you to make an argument about education, right? So we've been looking at a variety of articles that have to do with education and different aspects of it. And of course there are tons of possible topics out there that have nothing to do with anything we've read, right? From teacher pay to how we train teachers to the costs of higher education, etc. These are just a smattering of education-related things for you to think about, but your topic can be drawn from any aspect of education. And then the rhetoric that we've been looking at in the slideshows and in the one on logical fallacies as well is just to remind us how to make good arguments, right? What do you present in an argument, and how do you use that to try to persuade people? The final thing I wanted to talk to you about, if you look on Blackboard under web links, you'll see a folder that's research web links, and it says please use these on essays 2 through 4, right? On there you'll find a variety of things. You'll find links to the NOC databases, EBSCOhost and Gale and ProQuest. ProQuest, you have to be physically present on one of the NOC campuses to use. So I'm not going to really talk about it, since I assume since you're taking an online class you may not be. But if you are, all you have to do is just click on it on the website and link, and you'll get it. I did want to show you, like that's going to work. Probably not. Okay, so I'll have to just maybe tell you, yes, that didn't work at all. Here, if you're off campus and you click on the EBSCOhost link, it's going to ask you for both a user ID and a password. The user ID is the word student, all lowercase. The password is NOC, all lowercase. So again, that's for EBSCOhost. The username is student, all lowercase. The password is NOC, all lowercase. If you click on Gale, which is another database you can access off campus, it will just ask you for a passcode. That's the syllable TONK, T-O-N-K, all lowercase. All the databases, and any others, by the way, that you have access to, if you're an OSU student and you have access to JSTOR or Academic Index or some other databases, those are even better, right? Because obviously OSU's resources are far beyond what NOC has. So any of the databases that you use, keep in mind a couple of things. One, limit your search in various ways. Limit it to full text so that you don't just get abstracts, but you get the actual articles. And look for a full text box on EBSCOhost, and if you use it on ProQuest as well. Try to find PDFs or articles that can be downloaded as PDFs, because then you get something that's much more like an actual print article, including page numbers that you can use in your works cited page, your parenthetical citations, and to refer readers to specific quotes, specific bits of information. Also keep in mind that each of those databases have citation tools that will actually generate APA and MLA style references or works cited page entries that you can then copy and paste right into your paper. So it makes preparing your references page or your works cited page a whole lot easier. The best thing, though, about using the databases is if you put in something like college cost or college tuition costs in one of the databases, you may get 5,000 hits, right, until you limit it somehow. Type it in Google. I did this the other day. I got over 1 million hits. Right? And a lot of the things you're going to find on Google are going to be, well, crap, right? Facebook postings, blog entries from people who really don't know what they're talking about, very biased things from political sites, etc. Using the databases assures you that the information you're locating has been vetted by professionals and is much more likely to be accurate and useful to you. So I would strongly encourage you to use EBSCOhost, Gale, ProQuest if you're on one of the campuses physically, or any other database that you have access to. Also included on those research links, you'll see 3 fact-checking sites, PolitiFact, factcheck.org, and Snopes.com. I think factcheck.org is excellent. I used to think PolitiFact was excellent, but the last time I was on there, I realized that they were actually running those auto-generated Google ads. And the problem with that is sometimes those are fake news. So I was on there the other day. This is on PolitiFact, right, which has won awards for its fact-checking, right? But I'm on the site the other day, and an ad appears across the page. The Rock is dead. Dwayne Johnson passes his passing, shocks his fans, right? Well, Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, is not dead. That was fake news. So here you have the wonderful irony of a fact-check site promoting fake news, right? Now, I realize no one at PolitiFact probably ever signed off on that. They just are paying Google's paying them to run those ads on their site, right? So I'm going to blame Google for not vetting those ads more closely and allowing fake news to get out there. But it was really kind of funny and tragic at the same time to see a fact-checking site that has won awards for its investigative journalism and getting to the truth to be running basically fake news on their site. But if you ignore those, I think PolitiFact's pretty good. And they do the little truthometer where you can actually, they judge like the president or other public leaders what they've said. And keep in mind, this is a nonpartisan site. They harassed President Obama when he didn't tell the truth just as much as they do President Trump. So that's there. Snopes.com is also good. It looks more into, it does political stuff and current events and things like that, but it also delves a little bit more into pop culture and celebrities and that kind of stuff. But those 3 sites are widely used fact-checking sites. And then down at the bottom, you'll see a Forbes magazine or Forbes website article, which I think is very good. Forbes is a conservative Republican business magazine. Steve Forbes, the guy who owns it, ran for the Republican nomination for president on, I think, 3 different occasions. Never got it, but he kept running. I mentioned that because, people often accuse those of us in higher ed of being a bunch of crazy liberals trying to, slant everything. This is not my opinion on what top credible sites are. It comes from Forbes, again, a conservative Republican publication. And they rank them according to credibility. These are the most credible sites. Number 1, New York Times. Number 2, Wall Street Journal. Number 3, Washington Post. And you go down and you see the news organizations that, according to experts, are the ones where you are most likely to be able to trust what they're telling you, right? You'll notice what's not on that list are partisan sites like Fox News on the right and MSNBC on the left, right? And there are many others. The Breitbart Report on the right, Democracy Now! On the left. And again, I'm not trying to pick fights with any particular site. I'm just saying if you get into sites that are heavily politicized or radical from either perspective, right-wing, conservative, left-wing, liberal, or progressive, you're sometimes going to get into trouble, right? So those sites, and then I have links to the 9 of them, everything except the news services or wire services there. Now, obviously, you can't just go to the New York Times and automatically find an education article because you can't always just search. And some of these things, of course, you have to be a subscriber to get full access. But I wanted you to have access to what I think are some real quality news and information sites, at least what access you can get without being a paid subscriber. So that's there mainly just to remind you where you should be getting your information. That doesn't mean if it's not on that list, it's just horrible or incredibly biased, but it's a good place to start building your own media literacy, right? We live in a world where terms like fake news, alternative facts, post-truth are used all the time. I am at war with those very concepts, right? Some things are fake news because they're just out and out lies, like the story that The Rock had died, right? More often, though, people call things fake news that they don't want to believe, right? For whatever reason. And that's not legitimate. You don't get to make up your own truth. There is such a thing as truth, and we often can figure out what it is. And you do not have the right to say, oh, that's not true because I don't believe it, if a vast majority of the experts in that field agree that that's truth, right? That way just leads to anarchy and contributes to our whole country falling apart, which it seems to be in the process of doing right now, if you haven't noticed. So these things are important, right? And the way we do research and how we present our research is important. So be thinking about what you want to write about. Feel free to email me with topics or ideas so I can give you some feedback on them. I hope this has been helpful. I know it's tough to listen to someone yak off the cuff for 30 minutes, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of my take on what I've been asking you to read and watch. And I will be on the discussion board next week posting some comments and commentary on some of the things on the actual discussion board where you've been posting your ideas. So thank you for your patience with me. I'm hoping I can get caught up soon. As you'll see, everything has been pushed back 1 week. So the next essay is not due until the week after next. I needed some more time with my face-to-face classes to be able to cover all this material, and I thought you guys wouldn't mind having an extra week as well. So hang in there. I know I'm not the greatest online teacher at communicating regularly. I get bogged down with my day-to-day classes and sometimes don't give you guys as much attention as you deserve. I promise you I'm going to try to do better from here on out, and I hope you'll just have a little patience with me. All right, thank you. Have a wonderful weekend, and I will be in touch soon. Bye.